in a quiet African village, there lived two sisters, Ada and Neka. Every morning they dressed in their finest clothes, admiring themselves in the mirror. They believed they were the most beautiful girls in the whole land, and dreamed that one day the prince would fall in love with one of them. One sunny morning, the village became full of excitement. The young prince, Obinna, had arrived for his national youth service. He looked handsome in his YYYSC uniform and smiled kindly at everyone. The sisters watched from afar, already planning how to win his heart. Not far away, in a small clay hut, lived a humble girl named Amara. Her father was a farmer who worked hard in the fields, and her mother sold food at the market. Amara was learning to sew so she could help her family. Though she had little, her heart was full of dreams. One afternoon, as the prince passed by, he saw Amara sitting by her sewing machine. She was focused and gentle, sewing with care. The prince stopped, smiling at her kindness. Their eyes met, and something warm and special began to grow. As days turned into weeks, the prince visited Amara often. They talked under the shade of the big tree. He told her stories of the palace. She told him about her dreams. Their laughter filled the air, and love quietly grew between them like a flower after rain. But Ada and Neka were not happy. They could not believe the prince chose a poor girl instead of them. Jealousy filled their hearts, and they began to gossip, hoping to make Amara look bad. Though still, the prince's heart was firm. He loved Amara truly. Soon, the prince's service year came to an end. He had to return home to the palace. Holding Amara close, he promised, "I will come back for you." Tears rolled down their cheeks as the sun set behind them. When the prince returned to his father's palace, the king, Ize Udochukwu, welcomed him proudly. The palace shone with gold, and drums echoed through the air. Everyone was happy, except the prince, whose thoughts were still with Amara. That night, the prince knelt before his father. "Father," he said softly, "I have found the woman I want to marry." The king smiled until he heard who she was. When he learned she was a farmer's daughter, his face turned cold. "No," the king said with a heavy voice. "There are many princesses waiting for you. You cannot marry a poor girl." The prince bowed his head, heartbroken, but he did not give up. Again and again, the prince tried to explain that love was not about riches or status, but the king would not listen. "A king's blood must stay royal," he said. The palace fell silent, filled with tension and pain. Finally, the king called upon the oracle to decide his son's fate. Messengers were sent, and that night, the oracle arrived, old, wise, and mysterious. The people gathered, trembling as the drums stopped beating. The oracle threw his cowries and spoke in a deep voice. "If the prince marries a poor girl, sorrow will come to this kingdom." The air grew still. Even the king looked frightened. The prince's heart sank like a stone in a river. That night, the prince sat alone in his room. The moonlight touched his face as he wept. His crown felt heavy, his heart torn between duty and love. He wished he could choose freely, but the chains of tradition held him tight. Far away in the small village, Amara waited. Every evening she sat by her sewing machine, sewing clothes and dreaming of his return. Sometimes she looked out the window and whispered his name, hoping the wind would carry her voice to him. At the palace, the king made his final decision. He announced that his son would marry a princess from another land. The palace cheered, drums beat loudly. But the prince stood in silence, his eyes full of sadness. That night, when everyone slept, the prince made his choice. He took a small bag and left the palace quietly. The moon guided him as he ran back to the village, to the only woman his heart desired. When he reached Amara's hut, she was still awake, sewing by the oil lamp. She looked up and saw him standing there. Tears filled her eyes as she ran into his arms. They held each other tightly, both crying, knowing this would be their last night together. But before the morning came, the king's guards found them. In the struggle, one guard's sword struck the prince. Amara screamed as he fell into her arms. The moon faded, and the world went quiet. The love that had once shone so bright was gone. When the sun rose, the village was silent. Amara sat beside her sewing machine, tears rolling down her face. The birds sang softly as if mourning with her. Though the prince was gone, his love lived forever in her heart, pure, deep, and eternal. If this is the first time of coming across our channel, you may not see us again, unless you subscribe and turn on your notification button. Thank you for watching.